Once again, thank you for joining us. My name is Peter Benson. I am the SVP of Treasury Services here at Park Bank. I lead our Treasury team and our community engagement team, and we work to bring value to nonprofits, small businesses alike. Through these webinars, hopefully we're giving you some things to consider, and we are educating you on topics that you want to know about. Today, we are going to learn how to plan social media content in a time-efficient manner. Our presenter is Sarah Best. Sarah is the CEO of Sarah Best Strategy, which is based in Middleton. She and her team have won over a dozen awards for their digital marketing work, including best use of a social media platform from Travel and Leisure. She's been recognized as a 40 under 40 in business, and her work has been featured in Success, Crain's Chicago Business, Mashable, TechCrunch, Chicago Tribune, National Geographic Traveler, and other publications. A guest lecturer at the University of Wisconsin School of Business, Sarah is an alumna of New York University, has continued her executive education at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, and holds a certificate in entrepreneurship from the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program at Benson College. With that, I will turn it over to Sarah. Welcome her aboard, and can't wait to hear what she has to say.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Peter. It's really an honor to be here today to talk to, some of the nonprofit organizations who are making a big difference in this community, and also to the small businesses who are really that make up the heart of our economy. So today, as Peter mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about social media and how we can manage that in a time-efficient manner. To get us started, I'm going to ask you a question for the day for you to answer in the chat to help us get to know each other a little bit. Just for context, I think Peter mentioned that we're based right here in Middleton. Just mentioning that we're a team of 12 people and we're spread across Madison, Milwaukee, and Chicago. My team has grown, it's doubled in the last year. And so I can really feel a lot of your pain in terms of needing to save time on marketing and needing to be as time efficient as possible when we're kind of juggling different priorities. I also like to mention usually that we work with organizations of all sizes. So the nice thing about this is that we've benefited from working with really complex, big organizations like YMCA of the USA, which has 2,600 Ys across the country. But we also work with teams at places like Easter Seals or the Orthopedic Research Education Foundation, where they only have teams of 1 or 2. So I like to think from that type of experience, we've learned a lot about how to manage bandwidth and how to prioritize social media activities to really be realistic for the people that we're serving. So my thing skipped ahead, so give me a quick sec. There we go. Answer in the chat, please. As I'm kind of setting up our topic for the day, what's your name? What organization or business do you represent? And a question I have for you in relation to our topic today is, how many hats do you wear in your job? And what percentage of your job is actually focused on social media? So I'm going to give you guys a second or a couple, minute or so to weigh in while I am setting things up. But I'm curious to see what your responses are as we go. Whenever I do a talk, I like to try to set things up with a quote. And when I was thinking about how do we tackle the problem of wearing too many hats, I found this quote in Harvard Business Review, which says that the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. So today we're going to talk about some best practices and time-saving tips and tricks, but we also want to talk about what do we not do within that kind of time and budget constraints that we have. All right, so this is how we're going to explore our topic today. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I see you 75% of your job is focused on social media. I'm curious to hear from other participants who you are, what your organization is, and what percentage of your job is focused on social. So we're going to discuss, best practices for choosing things to do and what not to do. And I'm going to share some best practices for social media content planning as we've tested in hundreds of companies. Okay, I see someone that says 20% is social media, 25%. So we're wearing a lot of hats, and only a small percentage of those a lot of times is focused on social media. Yeah, I definitely see that. And hello, Megan from Madison Cat Project. I adopted my beloved cat from you, so thank you for that. We're also going to look at some tips for adapting your content across platforms. We're going to think about AI. Of course, that's on everyone's mind right now, and some tools and techniques for using AI to save some time as well. 10%, Kayla, I see that. I love seeing all your responses. I love seeing all of the types of organizations that you're here from. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. I encourage you to keep sharing as we go. I wanted to mention before we get too far into things, now I know Park Bank is also going to make sure you have a copy of the recording and also the presentation. I also set up a page that'll help you that'll help you get not just our presentation today, but also some related resources. It's all free. There's no requirement to put in your email or anything like that. So I put that link in the chat if you're participating live. As Peter mentioned, we're going to use the Q&A feature to ask questions. So we'll save 10 or 15 minutes at the end for that. I've also included in here a bunch of printable worksheets. So those are on pages 46 to 57 when you get the actual presentation. So you can just print out those pages and you'll have your own kind of templates that you can work with like after the talk today. All right. So what are some tools we have for figuring out what not to do? The first one that I really like is a vision statement. So if one of your kind of obstacles to being successful on social media is that you're wearing too many hats, and it looks like a lot of you are, social media isn't like your primary job function for the most part, or you don't have enough time or you don't have enough money, a vision statement can help you prioritize how you spend your resources. And your resources include your time, they include your budget. Having a vision statement can also help us get buy-in across our organization. If we're in a position where we're relying on several people to execute social media or take pictures or anything like that, gather stories, then a vision statement can help align multiple team members like efforts too. And when we don't have a vision, we can waste resources, we can waste time. Sometimes we kind of fall prey to low motivation because it feels like something we just have to do rather than something we're really motivated to do. So I think that, it's easy to fall into this trap of busyness. And, if we're looking at our posts in a given month, do they align with that vision or not? So I think it's a pretty simple thing that we can do and can be very helpful for prioritization. Here's an example from one of our clients. So this is an old vision statement. I think this was the first of several strategy projects that we did for the Nature Conservancy. But their vision statement for this project was, we transport our fans into the field to see and understand the impact of our work and invite them through clear and thoughtful calls to action to conserve nature for its own sake and its ability to fulfill our needs and enrich our lives. So this vision statement, one of the things that it does is it suggests ways that the Nature Conservancy needs to spend their time and money. And it's the place that it needs to put its resources are on things like nature photography, things that would transport people into the field, videography in the field, getting science communicators into the field. So often we have scientists in the field, but maybe not someone who's able to capture a story. It gives us also some clues as to why we ask people to advocate for something. So it helps us understand like the why behind our storytelling as well. And when you have a clear vision statement, I think it's going to help you save some time. It's going to help you save some money by focusing your efforts from where you are right now to where you'd like to get to, right? That's what a vision does, is it gives us that kind of goal in mind that we're moving towards. All right. So you'll get this worksheet as part of the packet of worksheets, But a vision statement doesn't have to be as fancy as the one that I just showed you. It could be as simple as saying, like, we are using social media in order to do what? And that's important to us because why? I think it's helpful sometimes when we're establishing a vision for social media to ask questions across a number of people on your team of what would we ideally like to have happen if anything were possible on our social media. That's a good starting point. I think what I like about that is, yes, we all have constraints, but if we give ourselves permission to think in a more blue sky way, just for a moment, it gives us a better chance of arriving at a compelling vision. And asking a number of people can help you listen for points of consensus or points of conflict. So again, if we think about social media as something we need to kind of get buy-in on across a team or across an organization, it can be helpful to try to find, what the common denominator is. For nonprofits, I think you can also look at your mission statement and how social media might support that work. For small businesses, a vision statement could be as limited or narrow as thinking about a new product, service offering, or vertical you'd like to get into. Your vision statement can change over time. Vision statement gives us a goal. If we've met that goal, we can kind of shift it again. So what are your blue sky aspirations? It's not written in stone. These are things that might change over time, and it suggests stories that you might like to tell. So that's a question to consider. If anything were possible, what would we like social media to be doing for us? Now, conversely, vision statements kind of give us this expansive way of thinking. Goals kind of help us narrow into the specific activities that we need to do to move towards that goalpost. So why do goals feel so scary so often in relationship to social media? A lot of times we just have too many of them. Like, we're working on too many at a time. Sometimes they're too big. Sometimes we can't act on them. We're not sure if we're picking the right goal. I hear that a lot from clients that we coach. Or maybe we feel like we don't know enough about social media to set them. One of the things I like to do in my talks and like in my kind of how I work with people is to try to help you sort of think about ways that you already are experts. You're experts on your organizations and businesses. You're experts on your customers. And what we really need to do is kind of lean on those strengths when we're answering these questions. So if we reframe some of these sort of scary statements, we could say we have a reasonable number of small goals that we can achieve within a specific time frame, and we're looking at them regularly, right? That's going to set us up for success. They're actionable and specific enough that we know whether an activity is complete. It's not something that has like a never-ending kind of openness to it. We know if it's done or not. We know if we've seen an improvement or if we've finished doing some research on something. And we have the wisdom, all of us, no matter what we know about social media, to choose things that matter to us, because the goals are serving us and not the other way around. We're not serving the goals are serving us, right? A tool that I really like in this regard is if things feel too intangible, if we're having trouble getting our vision and kind of formulating it into smaller goals, is to use this kind of framework of SMART goals, which maybe some of you have heard about before. So is your goal specific? Can you act on it? Is it too vague? Do you have enough information? Measurable. How do you know when it's done? And I'll show you an example in a minute of that. Actionable or achievable. Do we have the time and resources to do this activity? Realistic and relevant. Is it relevant to your vision statement? Is it relevant to your broader goals? And then time bound is we know when we're doing it by, right? So a lot of us at the beginning of the year, we set all these like aspirations for ourselves, and then we promptly never look at that piece of paper again, right? So I think by setting a time bound sort of element to our goals, we can continue to make progress, however incremental that is, and really move ourselves in the direction that we want to go in. So here's some examples. Here's two sets of examples. So an example, a common example we see of a goal is that we want to reach new donors, we want to reach new customers, right? And so this goal is specific. It says it's not just we want to reach new donors. We want to get email addresses for 25 people so that we can send them follow-up emails ahead of a giving campaign or ahead of a product launch. And how do we know if that's done? Well, we know because we've got the 25 emails and they're coming from social. This goal is achievable because we have we have the tools in place. We've got a lead generation campaign template that we can update. We have sort of a campaign template we can kind of filter new product information into, et cetera. This is relevant to our vision because we'd like to expand our pool of donors. And we have good luck cultivating them through email. And then we're going to plan to do this ahead of our Q4 product launch. Now, that's a pretty advanced goal. It's a simple goal, but it's specific, right? We know whether we have the tools and whether it's relevant to us, and we know exactly like what the shape of it is. Now, it's okay for goals to also look like this. And we'd like to invest some time in learning about ways to grow our donor base. And we'll know if we've achieved this if we've found 3 YouTube videos or articles with good ideas. And we've had a discussion internally about what ideas make sense to us. This goal is achievable because we can spend 30 minutes looking for YouTube videos or articles and have set time aside next week. So this gives you an idea of like, if your goals feel out of reach, maybe you just need to break it down into smaller chunks. Maybe you need to make sure that the time frame that is required to do this is actually aligned with the time that you have in a week for more strategic projects. And this is relevant to our vision because we want this. Still, maybe you have the same relevance to your vision, but it just gives you an idea that it's okay for more modest goals to be there along your path of moving towards your vision. Okay, let's talk about social media content planning. I'm curious in the chat if any of you currently don't have a plan and you just kind of wing it and you just sort of post things when you hear about things and you just kind of do things day by day, because if you do that, you're not alone. I have heard that many times from many people who kind of sheepishly admit that, maybe it's not so optimal. In its essence, winging it. Yes. Thank you, Alyssa, for owning that. That's us. It's not fun. Yeah. No, it feels like you're gonna, you're really putting out a fire every day, right? What I want to tell you is that a plan doesn't have to be so complicated, right? In its essence, it is a calendar that has topics written on it, right? A topic, really, it's just a short phrase that reminds you what you want to talk about. So this could look like a whiteboard in an office. It could look like a physical paper calendar. It can look like an online calendar. It can look like a calendar that's baked into a social media management tool. It could be a spreadsheet that's got dates in it. It could be a list in a notebook or notes app. So I know some of you are probably I'm on boots on the ground with my customers all the time. It's okay if it's in a notes app on your phone. There's no preciousness around the form, right? When we're trying to just get things done, we overcomplicate some things sometimes. I think there's some benefits to maintaining a simple plan. So why do we plan? It stops us feeling like we have to constantly put out fires. So some of you are kind of speaking to that right now. Maybe you have too much to post. Maybe you have not enough to post. It also reminds you to be strategic. So are you regularly asking people to do the things that you want them to do? If you're trying to get people to buy a product or to become a donor or to sign up to volunteer, are you remembering to ask them that, right? Well, what happens if you put that reminder to do that ask on the same day each month? Well, suddenly it becomes much easier to remember to ask people to do those things. Calendars and plans kind of help us prioritize. So sometimes we fall into this trap of thinking that social media can accommodate infinite content, right? It can't, because you have limited time and you're one human or maybe a team of several humans. And so we have to start thinking about it as finite and have to start using our calendars as here are our slots that we have for the month, right? And when we have limited slots, what happens is we start to prioritize the things that matter most, right? So maybe you have a program or something that, it could sell itself, like you've already got a lot of signups, and, maybe that's not the program that you choose to promote. Maybe you focus on something that is lagging behind a little bit, right? And so the other thing I like about topics is that it's not specific to social media. You can use topics on a blog, you can use topics in an email, you can use topics on Facebook, you can use topics on TikTok. Topics work universally across platforms, right? And if we can save ourselves from planning separate calendars for separate types of communications, that's really gonna reduce the amount of work that we have to do, right? The other thing about topics is, if you're planning content in a group at all, more people can participate if you're not stuck in the weeds of like what you need to do for a specific post. The other nice thing is once you have a plan for a year, let's look back at last year and see what we did and see if we need to update that at all, right? A lot of times businesses or organizations are seasonal. We have certain things that happen at certain times of year. We have programs that repeat at certain times of year. And so why do that headache of like planning like each day, each week, each month, when we can have a plan and just kind of freshen up the pictures we're using, change the messaging up a little bit. I guarantee you, if you're posting about like a summer camp sign up, by next summer, no one's going to remember the exact language that you used, right? So this is a really good strategy for saving us time as well. So yeah, again, posts don't translate between platforms necessarily. They've got different creative forms. We have some have videos, some have images, etc. But topics do. And topics can help us plan email and social at the same time, right? And to be clear, I'm not saying you shouldn't pre-draft your posts. I'm not saying you don't need to get specific, like Megan is suggesting in the chat. What I'm saying is that there's a time for planning and a time for getting into detail. If you try to get into the detail when you're planning, it's much, much harder to do. And if you don't have a plan, getting into detail is much, much harder to do. So we're making a blueprint and then we're building the house, right? How you plan matters. I like to advocate for planning in groups. Now, some of you see this and you're like, no way, I don't want other people to complicate this. It's already hard enough as it is. I'm going to tell you some stories about this and why this makes sense. So the first story is from a small organization that had a small marketing team, but several programs going on. So two of the people on that team were promoting events that were almost the same. Like they had similar sort of themes, but they didn't do any cross promotion between those two programs. And that's because they weren't in the same room together, right? So when we're in the same room together and we're talking about topics for a month, sometimes you naturally, like ideas will spark off of ideas. Someone will say, hey, this is going on. And then someone will be like, oh, you know what, that would be really good for my audience, like too, right? So that's one reason to kind of get people in the same room. The other story I have is from a large organization where the lead on social media had a boss that didn't really understand what was happening on social and was constantly on their case about it. Getting that person in the room during planning once a quarter, it created some transparency on what was coming up. It also created buy-in. So I saw this vice president during this session pace around the room and start coming up with ideas. Probably those ideas were ones her team had suggested to her, but it gave her an outlet, right? It gave her a time and a place for discussing something. So she didn't feel like she was being kept in the dark, and she felt like her priorities were also being listened to. Now, the key to making this work is to say, hey, so-and-so or the marketing team has the final say on what's going out. But I've seen this strategy work of group content planning across organizations of all sizes and all budgets. And I mean, I've done it in a church basement with people, right? Like it's like whatever your situation is. We've done this in Google. We've done this in many different types of places. So it seems to work in all of the environments that we've been in. So here's an idea of like how to visualize this. What does this look like? So it could be a meeting once a month with a whiteboard or some sticky paper up on the walls. it could look like jumping on a Zoom call and looking at a spreadsheet together, a calendar or a Jamboard. Jamboard is a free tool from Google that is used for brainstorming. It could look like you yourself sitting down and taking out some time to pull out a notebook that you just used for this purpose, or a notes app on your phone and writing out a plan for the month. The ground rules when you are planning with the group, though, are not to step on people's light bulbs. Marketing team has final say. So what I mean by this is when we brainstorm, we want to think expansively. It's super easy to cross something out or delete it or take it off of a whiteboard or a calendar. It's much harder to get it on there in the first place, right? The way I like to suggest people tackle content planning is to first establish a list of content buckets. So you want to outline all the topics that you tend to talk about on a regular basis and then organize it into a checklist. And every month you're going to use this as a basis for your content planning. So you only have to develop a checklist once, and then you can review it once a quarter, every 6 months, once a year to see if your themes have changed. So here's some examples of content buckets. I won't read all of these out, but for example, you might have a content bucket that's shaped around people who haven't met you yet and the messages that they need to hear. You might have a content bucket around upcoming events or programs. You might have a content bucket around your audiences, like maybe young families, young professionals, empty nesters, these different kinds of messages, different kinds of programs, different kinds of products. You might have it kind of listed by persona or audience. You could have it by theme. You could have a content bucket for calls to action. So hopefully this sparks some ideas. And again, you'll get to look at this list later when you see the kind of PDF copy of the presentation. But hopefully that sparks some ideas of what that looks like. A good tip I have for you is to look at your website navigation. The buckets in your navigation, the main categories, tend to also be the themes that you typically talk about. I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like. So for one of our nonprofit clients, their content buckets were things like upcoming events or timely issues or holidays. Then we had like meet the staff volunteer profiles happening once a month. Partner shoutouts. I love partner shoutouts on social because you get to tag that partner. And that's how we bring two audiences together, right? How we get in front of more people. Program news number 1, program news number 2. So this forced their staff to kind of think about what are the 2 programs we want to highlight this month. Key messages. What is our message this month for people who don't know us yet? And then what are our key asks? So I'll show you the topics in a second so you kind of connect the dots there. Here's an example for a small business. So Love Great Dane, Pub, their content buckets look more like events, beer releases, menu or specials, promotions, their involvement in the community, news, planning your visit, hiring, and calls to action. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas on like how different people use this sort of format. So once you have your content buckets each month, you just kind of sit down and fill in the blanks. So let's say we're talking about May for our nonprofit client. In May, they had Peace and Healing Center calendar day in May, and they had a Get Out the Voice events. They picked a specific staff member that they wanted to highlight and the partner that they wanted to kind of shout out and tag on social media. They talked about the programs that had events or certain things happening in this time frame. But you can also highlight ones that you just haven't talked about in a while too. Key messages, their asks happen to be to apply for a case manager position or to donate. So here's an example of what that looks like on a calendar. So I put the Garfield cartoon because I don't know, I grew up with Garfield, but I tend to avoid the beginning of the week because I feel like if you're speaking to people who have office jobs, Mondays can be busy, they can be full of emails, they can be unpleasant. And so I tend to put things that are more important towards the end of the week and maybe like avoid the front end of the week. But every business and nonprofit is different, and you have to decide like what makes sense for your audience. But you can see like I put the content buckets here like on the days of the week and on certain days of the month, and that helps us kind of take our topics and put them into a plan pretty quickly. Now, the nice thing about this format is that, like, if you do it by content buckets, you can just repeat the pattern like every month. Other people that have a higher volume of content, they tend to assign themes to each day of the week. So anything we can do to kind of make our lives easier, to take some of the guesswork out of putting this on a calendar, that's what they typically do. Now, the other advice I'd give here is if you have something timely coming up, like let's say Independent Bookstore Day, which is on April 29th, you put that in the calendar first, and then you kind of plan the other things around it. So you can shift things around a little bit too if there's something like time sensitive like going on. So, all right. Here's, again, I won't go into all of this, but you can see, here's an example where there's quite a bit of content. So we've got Badger games to talk about, and specials that go along with that for Great Dane. And then things like, new releases or new menu specials like each Tuesday. And you can see here an example of what it looks like to have some themes for different days of the week. So again, you'll get all of these examples and blank worksheets that you can use to kind of fill this out for yourself. The 5 other questions that I recommend asking during planning meetings are, what actions do we want people to do after they've seen our post? So for my client, Proyecto Pastoral, Christmas Novena events are very important to them. So, other times they're connecting because there's an urgent issue that's impacting their community that they need to talk about. So other programs run when school's out. So all of these are opportunities to connect and authentically engage with people. And some of the actions that kind of go along with that would be things like event signups, or even just like looking at a certain pages on the site, or it could be filling out a form or purchasing something. So how do we know if we did that or not? So this is a tricky question to answer sometimes. Sometimes we're kind of doing things, we're putting them out in the ether, and we're not quite sure if it's working or not, right? So I recommend thinking about, like, what do we know? What are we able to track, right? Are we able to track like link clicks? Are we able to track how many people we've reached through impressions? Are we able to track how many people submitted a form on a specific page, or how much of our traffic from our website is being driven by social media? Let's try to be as specific as we can about this. We're not just hoping for the best. We're trying to kind of get specific and outline the specific thing we know that we'd see if they did the thing. What events or time issues are happening in our audience's lives this month? What broader conversations are happening outside of organizations? So sometimes people, tap into social media holidays here, or awareness months, or hashtags. Those can be ways to kind of connect with broader pools of people as well. And then I love this last question: who can help us get the word out this month? And when we ask this question, then we can think about like partners to shout out. We can think about audiences that we can bring together. We can even think about people we could just reach out to by email and say, hey, we're getting ready to talk about this. Could you share this out through your social media networks too? So I think it's a good question to kind of reflect on when you are sitting down and doing planning. So here's some example just answers. So for Proyecto Pastoral, their key actions they wanted were to apply for a case manager position. So a metric that we would know that happened is the number of applications or donations received. It could be engagement on a job post, but that's less direct than the applications received, or visits to a donation page or a job page that are coming from social media, which is something we can often see in Google Analytics. Events and timely, you can kind of see what that looks like. And then, they identified a partner to shout out in the month. All right, so that's kind of my advice on content planning. I'm sure some of you have questions. Definitely make sure you're using the Q&A, and we'll take a look at that in about 10 minutes. So some other time-saving tools and techniques. So pop quiz, not get ahead of myself. If you give a child a choice about whether they'd like to fold a big pile of laundry or a small pile of laundry, what do you think that they would choose? Somebody shout this out in the chat. Of course, small. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Stephanie. You're right, Melissa. Neither, Melissa. They have to pick. So yeah, they're gonna pick the small one, right? All right, so if we give a child a choice about whether they'd like a really big cookie or a small cookie? And this presumes that they can't have all of the cookies. Which one would they pick? Which they pick the big cookie or they pick the small cookie? Anyone in the chat? Big cookie. Yeah, that's right, Lonzel. Yeah, so congratulations. You know how AI works. So a lot of people, AI, it can seem so mysterious, and of course it's new, and there's like so many ways to use it and so many ways not to use it. But essentially, I think a smart idea about thinking about AI is, how do we use AI to increase things that spark joy and decrease things that don't spark joy, sort of a la Marie Kondo. And this idea comes from the really brilliant designer and thinker, John Maeda, who's the VP of design for artificial intelligence at Microsoft. So things that do spark joy are things like decision making. Can we use AI to gather some information for us that's going to help us make decisions? You could ask AI to tell you, I would love, 10 topic ideas related to this content bucket, for example, and then you can make the decision about what makes sense for you. Talking with people, we're not trying to replace that. Learning from others, mentoring, coaching, all these relationship things that we as humans really crave. Crafting strategies is something that, that we like to do too. Well, but some of the things that we don't love to do are things like calendar management, writing email subject lines. You know what? Google, ChatGPT is really, really good at writing email subject lines, and they kind of follow a formula, right? So it doesn't require as much. It's not a relationship building tool as it is an effective way to get people to open an email, for example. Summarizing long pieces of writing for social media. Yeah, it's really good at that. Applying writing style guides. So let's say you set some guidelines for how your social media posts should be formatted or how long they are. You can tell ChatGPT, for example, to apply those rules to the piece of content, and it will draft something for you. Checking other people's writing. If you're using, volunteers or other staff to help you with some social media content, you can use it to check their messages for brand voice adherence. You can say, here's my brand voice, and could you please check this? It suggests ways that this piece of writing could better match those attributes. Looking for something in a database is something that a lot of big companies are using it for. So we all create all this knowledge and it lives in all these different places. And so, AI tools can be very helpful in helping us locate something. I know in our, we use Shutterstock for our stock photography, and, there's many tools out there. And the smart way that they're using AI, I think, is not so much for the creation of images. It's for helping people find the right images that look like the images that you downloaded before, finding images that are tied to a specific objective, like awareness or driving traffic or conversions. It's also really good for monitoring things, like monitoring alerts. I read a story about someone who was using it to find articles on a certain topic in an academic database. And then they could go in and download those and kind of look at them themselves. So that's how we want to think about AI. And if we think about it in this framework, then we can use it to save time as well. Yeah, when you're short on time, adapt your content across platforms. I promise you, no one will die. We're not doing brain science, although I've worked with neurosciences, but their social media content is not a life or death situation. So what's more important? These are the kind of questions we can ask ourselves if we're like, oh no, we need to do something absolutely unique. Is consistency in communication to your audiences more important, or is content differentiation, being unique, absolutely unique across every platform, more important? Is strategy more important, or is differentiation more important? Is working extra to do more than your bandwidth allows more important, or is work-life balance more important, right? It's okay to adapt things across platforms. So here's kind of a cheat sheet. And again, you'll get this later so you can kind of look it over in more detail. A blog post, if we think about it at its root, is 3 to 5 paragraphs long, whereas an email teaser and a newsletter is a paragraph, and social media post should really only be 1 to 2 sentences. So when you think about that, you can start with the longest piece of writing and kind of adapt it down or summarize it down into shorter pieces. And then the nice thing about that is then you have brand consistency too across the different pieces of content that you're creating. So you can kind of reuse things a little bit and adapt them, and have them support each other, like too. Video, cheat sheet here is start with the hook. Don't build up. Don't take 2 minutes to get your message out. Like the popular videos these days are 15 to 60 seconds long. But videos can also yield audio files. So NPR is someone that does this. They'll have a video, then they'll have the audio version, then they'll have a transcript, right? So people, big media producers use a strategy all the time, and it's something that you can use too. And square format photos work across most platforms if you're going to use a still photo. And vertical videos work in a lot of different formats, from TikTok to Reels to stories to, it just works in a lot of different places. So we try to create posts in a format that will work across the most platforms. All right, I have to run through these because we're getting already, time's flying by. Things to watch out for when adapting: make sure you're adjusting those handles and tags. People's usernames change from platform to platform, so you got to double check those. Hashtags are used very differently. On Facebook, they're not used very much. On LinkedIn, they're very specific to types of LinkedIn topics. On a platform like Instagram, it's meant to facilitate discovery, same with TikTok. So watch for handles, watch for hashtags. Video, the big question to ask is this platform sound on by default or sound off by default? You need captions if it's sound off by default, right? You can't just rely on the audio to kind of tell the story. Your call to action might change a little bit differently, like the buttons that they give you. So if Instagram, sometimes we have to work around and put a link in a bio, for example. So these are some of the things you just kind of want to watch out for if you are adapting your content, but these things are pretty small things to kind of figure out. Annual reports. Ooh, if you're a nonprofit, it takes a long time, doesn't it? It's kind of a pain sometimes. So what you're going to want to do is, create infographics in your annual report that you can reuse on social. Create some snack-sized content, like all those facts and statistics and metrics that we gather. When we're doing those annual reports, can be reused for social. So let's think about social up front, right? It's also a great excuse to get some updated photography, get some new stories. So storytelling, we know that those things engage, that they connect. So taking a social media first approach to an annual report is a very smart idea if you're limited on time and you're at a nonprofit. Evergreen content. So just briefly, it's content that doesn't go out of date, and your website is a good mine for this. Like you already have content that shares key messages about yourself, about who you serve. You invested all that time in writing your website content, so let's adapt it for social. Now, you want some timely content too, but it really relieves the pressure if you've got some kind of pre-written content on set topics. And if you keep everything in one place, that's going to help you out too. Keep your visuals organized in one place. So you waste a lot of time if you're like hunting down things. If things aren't labeled, if they're all IMG dash something, then maybe you should give them a better label or organize them into some folders. Because guess what? That stuff, those little moments that we spend like looking through things, hunting through things, like they kind of rob us of our time, like too, right? So right on time for our Q&A. Just a summary. I love summaries at the end of talks because it's a lot of information. So figure out what not to do by knowing why you're using social media. Get specific about your goals. And let's not give ourselves amorphous goals that kind of set ourselves up for failure or just make us want to throw our plan in a drawer and not look at it for a year. Simplify things and when possible. Make a simple plan that you can reuse and adapt. Plan in a group. Lots of people have good ideas. Now we can't take all of them, but it can be a really good way to overcome a hurdle of not being sure what to post or having too much to post and needing some help prioritizing like what's most important. Adapt your content across platforms and use templates. Save, label, and organize everything that you do so you can pull it back up. You're building a little library for yourself, right? So save everything you do. And then you can pull it up at any time. And if you got a day where your brain's stuck, or you're not sure what to post, you've got a little library that you can pull on, and that's going to save you time as well. So that's what I have for you today. Hopefully that sparked some ideas. And I think now we can probably start the Q&A. So I see a couple of questions in here. And again, if you could use the Q&A chat, that helps a lot for keeping things organized. So Stephanie asks, are you actually posting 4 times a day? You know what? It depends on a couple of things. One is, how big of a brand are you, right? If you're a small brand, you don't have to compete with like a Nike or something, right? So yes, people who do social media full time for large brands, it does a lot of times make sense to do a lot of content because they have more resources that they can use to tell more stories, and they might be dealing with more complexity if they're a national brand. In retail, it can be very helpful because a lot of times, people aren't launching one product at a time. They're launching many products at a time, for example. So sharing retail photos throughout the day can make a lot of sense. But you have to be realistic about how much time you want to devote each week to working on your social media. And, I think that's where boosting posts can really be helpful, because if you boost a post like on a Facebook, Instagram, or something like that, there's equivalents on LinkedIn and other platforms. It runs continuously for a few days at a time. And so then we can emphasize kind of quality content that's distributed to a target audience, as opposed to a volume of quantity content, right? So thanks for that question, Stephanie. And then Kayla, do you have any tips for planning across different social media platforms? Yeah, hopefully my some of my tips answered that question, but to kind of reiterate what some of those are. Yeah, looking at the media formats. When I say media, I mean the images or videos, and trying to make them the size and shape that works on the most platforms possible. So when I asked my account managers about this, they recommended square format photos that are at least 1080 pixels wide, and vertical format videos as being the most versatile. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you are using Canva. Canva is a great time-saving tool. If you haven't taken a look at that, it's very low cost, or it's free for nonprofits. And it's loaded with all kinds of social media templates, so that can save you time as well. Canva also has a magic resize feature that lets you kind of size things from platform to platform. So you could make a flyer, for example, and resize it into a Facebook cover graphic within a few clicks. So that's a really great tool for helping with that challenge of adapting across platforms as well. So okay. Kaylin asks, how often should I be posting? So yeah, again, I think it depends on how much time you have in a week, right? And I think consistency is really good. And I think that 2 times a week at the minimum would be good across most platforms. And of course, you can do much more than that. It just kind of depends on how much time you can invest. And if you're someone that answered that 20% of my job is social, and I have, the other 80%, I'm working on other things, you have to be sensible and consider doing low cost boosted posts or sponsored posts, and getting those out in front of a set target audience instead of just creating warehouses of content. That's a quote from a content strategist that I really like, named Christina Halverson. We're all making warehouses of content. We need to make strategic content, right? So I hope that helps answer your question. I'm just going to mark that one. All right, Megan, what is your experience applying these strategies to online fundraising? Fundraising is kind of an interesting case. Megan, I think where you can save time is in, most fundraising strategy or campaigns follow a set format. I was just talking to one of my employees about this earlier today. So, a lot of times you're using your first post to kind of make a case, and then you've got some follow-up supporting points over the next few posts. And then you have a thank you at the end that kind of tells people how that's done. Now, on something like a Giving Tuesday, that's sort of collapsed into one day, which, by the way, on platforms like Facebook, there can be a lag of up to 24 hours from when people see things. So sometimes it's actually not the best idea to use certain platforms for Giving Tuesday. But in other cases, like an annual giving at the end of the year, you're using it over maybe a 6-week period of time or a 4 to 5 week period of time. And so that's one of the nice things about social is that you can tell stories over time, right? And when we tell stories over time to support an objective that we have, that also doing less content lets us sort of spotlight that very important ask more clearly. And it also, when we think about things in themes like that, it also kind of is a little bit easier, I think, to write, right? And again, if you have a fundraising case, that's the kind of thing that you could do to adapt to create your social media posts as well, because we do need to have that main ask and followed by those follow-ups. So thank you for that great question. All right, Ella, how can I gather content for my consumers? Ooh, that's an interesting question. It depends on the type of business that you're in. For people working in services like myself, we try to gather testimonials at the conclusion of most of our projects, because we know that that's something that helps facilitate a decision-making process. And so, we have that kind of baked into our offboarding process with clients. For others, it's going to be doing the same thing, but with online reviews. Those Google reviews are really important. And then I think what you might be getting at actually is more like other types of content. So, I've seen a couple of strategies there. I've seen people physically send kits to people and where they can photograph a project and post it online. And it has a little hashtag like in the box. I've seen people set up kind of Instagram spots in their places of business if you have a brick and mortar that can encourage people to post. Other people, they aren't doing it intentionally, but you think about something like Al Johnson's in Door County. They just have hot chocolate that's got like a mountain of whipped cream on it, and that's just asking to be Instagrammed. So there's a lot of different ways actually to think about that. I think, if you're trying to literally gather stories, then always templatizing that, making it really easy, giving people 1 to 3 questions to answer, and it's the same questions each time, is going to make your life a lot easier. Like 2, the other thing is, depending on how you collect stories, sometimes you need to give the people that are on the ground with the customers more time to get the stories from you, and set very clear guidelines on how many stories that you need to collect. Sometimes when we're marketers and we're just trying to push stuff out the door, we don't necessarily know the reality of like how long it takes to get like a story from a parent who has a child in a program, for example, and all the privacy concerns around that. So that's another reason to kind of plan in groups as well. So I hope that answered your question. These are really great questions. That's the last one that I see. Are there any in the regular chat window? I can take a look for a second. Do you think it's better to keep to a smaller selection of social media platforms that are in your direct demographic, or expand to other platforms that might bring in new customers? So I think there's a lot of misconceptions around platforms and their demographics. And the best advice I can give you is to go to Pew Research. So they are a nonprofit organization that does objective research on social media platforms. And every other year or so, they publish a social media guide that lists how many people in the United States are using each platform. And you can find equivalent data for international platforms as well. So I recommend looking at that, because sometimes the age ranges that are served by each platform and ethnic groups and racial identities and gender identities is actually broader than you might think. And so I think instead of making guesses, I think it's smart to take a look at the actual data and see what it says. But I think the root of your question was actually like, should we be on all the platforms? Maybe not if you have a limited time, right? Again, it's not infinite, it's finite. And so if we're thinking back to the quote from the beginning of choosing what not to do, it seems like you could maybe, prioritize 1 or 2 that matter the most to you. I'm never going to dissuade you from trying different platforms out. You should always play with platforms, but you have to be realistic in terms of like how much time you have too. So I hope that gives you a good idea of how to answer that too. So I think that's all the questions. Oh, okay. You're talking about a lag between Facebook posts and being viewed. Yes, when you post stuff, it doesn't necessarily get seen right away. Good thing to be aware of if you're promoting events, right? You might want to do it the day before instead of the day of. All right, and I see Peter has rejoined us, so I will let him wrap this up.
Well, I think you have wrapped everything up really well, sir. As somebody who is definitely not an expert on social media, I appreciated everything you shared. I learned a ton today, and I'm sure that our audience did too. And I really, really enjoyed the focus on strategy, because it is important for a lot of our nonprofits, a lot of our small businesses to figure out how to prioritize, and the planning tips and tools that you've given them, I think, will be invaluable as they really work to define their strategies and then form plans off of those strategies. So thank you so much for presenting for us and giving everybody these fantastic tools. It has been an absolute pleasure. We appreciate you. If anybody has follow-up questions for Sarah, you can see her contact info right down in the lower right-hand side of the screen. And we appreciate everybody again joining us and being active participants. This has been a fantastic presentation. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.